Science Live session here today. It is a Thursday and it is 1 p.m. here in Pacific Standard Time. Thank you for joining. My name is Amy Defoe. I'm one of the science teachers here at Graduation Alliance. I may be one of your science teachers, I may be your science teacher, or I might not be. Again, in these types of live sessions, that's not going to be an issue. The live sessions, we are going to go over parts of the courses and we'll go over some skills, but we'll also have an opportunity for you to ask questions and get any help that you might need. We use the same curriculum here in Graduation Alliance, no matter which teacher you have for science. So again, that's not going to be an issue. I can help you with that today. Today we're going to be talking about biology. We're going to look at biology semester 2, and I'll share the agenda here with you in just one moment. A couple things before we get started. Thank you again for joining. These live sessions are great. It's great to see interaction between myself and students and be able to help you guys out and also give you a little bit more information about the topics that you're learning about. You do have the option to pause yourself. So you do have, you can see on your screen, there's a little mute and unmute. So you're welcome to, if you got some background noise, mute yourself. So that way everybody else we don't hear it, no interruptions, all that good stuff. And then make sure that you are unmuted if you want to, talk out loud, answer a question, ask a question to get that feedback. You also have the chat function here where you can type in questions so that we can get those answered. Or if you have any feedback or you want to volunteer answer a question, that can be used as well, which would be great. These sessions are being re-recorded. They're being recorded so that, of course, if you miss this session, life happens, you'll be able to come to it at another time. We also know that sometimes you might not be at this particular part in your course, at this lesson that we're going to look at today. And so when you get to that, you'll have that ability to go back in there and see that. We've created this great library and every week we're adding more to it. And so as you think about, different courses that you go into, you'll be able to view those sessions as well. So it's a nice library resource for you guys to use. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and get started here with science. We're going to look at evolution and evidence here today, and this comes from biology semester 2. It looks at unit 4. Okay, and so here I put up a little picture kind of showing you a bunch of different organisms. I know it's kind of hard to see, but maybe you can make out some of those. You can definitely see that, it's almost like there's some trees here. And on this tree, we've got organisms that are branching off. And that's what we're going to kind of look at today, is this idea of evolution. I don't want to go into much because I'm going to ask you guys some questions about it. Okay, a little snippet here of our agenda. This is what we're going to be looking at here today, how we're going to spend this time. So first, I'm going to start and share with you guys some information about evolution. And then we'll have an opportunity for you to have a question and answer. So if there's something I go over about evolution, we can go over that. Or if you have other questions in biology or science or any of the other science classes that we have, we can go over that as well. And then I'm going to talk about in the next little segment here, I'm going to go over evidence and how we're going to do some skill building here. So how we use evidence and what kind of the importance is of using that evidence in daily life and also especially here in science. And then we'll end our session today with another opportunity for you to make sure that you get any of those last minute questions, help that you need on activities or course materials. We'll end with that so that you are set for the week. Okay, let's go ahead and get started, you guys. Okay, so I want you guys to take a look at this picture here for just a moment. I know you've seen something or something similar to this picture. What does this picture show to you? What does it mean? Maybe you've seen this. Okay, you can see it's kind of progressing. You heard that in a weird. You can see the organisms here. It looks like a human. Looks kind of like Somebody said like a monkey, yep. So we're kind of looking at, you could look at this picture and you could say kind of looking at the similarities between the two. You could also look at it and see kind of the progression of how things change. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, is looking at change over time. Okay, so evolution. What does evolution mean to you? You've probably heard this word many times before. Sometimes it's used in a sense that, makes sense, and other times it's used in kind of these stereotypes that we tend to hear sometimes. So what does that mean for you? I'm going to take a quick look here at this chat. Okay, I did give you guys some information in there as well. So evolution is the process by which different kinds of organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. Okay, so here again, we have kind of like what we saw at the beginning, that tree branching off here. So it's looking at how different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified. What do you guys know about diversify? Probably heard the word diversity before. Different. Okay, so how organisms have developed and then kind of changed from maybe earlier forms from the history of Earth. So looking at this picture, we're looking at very simple types of organisms going on into more complex organisms. And you'll see these kind of lines and these branches. And that's kind of showing the idea of how an organism develops and changes over time. So, in other terms, that was what I gave you guys there before, was the actual definition of evolution, and kind of put it into more simpler terms. To evolve means to change. So, we can evolve in many, many different ways. We can evolve into a great soccer player. We can evolve into a great, chess player. So we can change and we can learn things over time. But we can also think of as organisms, they can evolve and they can change over time. So evolution is a theory, and it's based on scientific evidence that describes how organisms change over time, over many, many, many generations. So again, we're not talking about something that happens immediate. This is a very, very slow change that occurs. Scientists believe that organisms have branched from each other and evolved into the different types of species. Now, we don't want to say that we come from each other, but we want to say that we're branching, we're evolving and changing into different types of species. And I'll put a little thing in here, evolution, it's not about where life came from or where life started from, or that, we hear sometimes, you'll hear people talk about, oh, we came from monkeys when they talk about evolution. Again, that's not what we're talking about. We could be talking about that, hey, maybe we have some common ancestors, but we're not talking about where life is coming from, how it started, or that we came from one species or another, okay? We're just looking at how organisms tend to change over time. And so another little image here kind of shows, these are different types of organisms. We've got apes and monkeys, all lemurs, different types of, I guess, what we would say primates. And then what this is kind of showing is how they've kind of, changed. They're all slightly different, and it's believed, some of them are more similar as others, as you can see in this image. You can see like the smaller branches here showing more similarities between each other. But that probably, in the beginning, these organisms were all much more similar, and then as the organisms evolved due to, we're going to talk about different reasons why an organism might evolve, think of to suit the needs of their surroundings, this would happen over time. Okay, so, well, who came up with this idea of evolution? And we're going to look at the three scientists that came up with these theories on evolution. There are Limerick, Wallace, and Darwin. Okay. I'm just checking this chat here real quick. Okay, so let's first talk about Limerick. And we're talking about 1809, before any of us were alive. Limerick proposed a hypothesis. So this was an idea based on observations that he made or an idea that he had to explain how species change over time. And this is known as the theory of acquired characteristics. So a characteristic would be a trait that a species or an organism would have had. When we think about acquired, that means that we get something, we acquire it. So he suggested that characteristics or traits develop during a parent's lifetime, and then they're inherited by its offspring. So in his idea, he's saying that these characteristics, they developed quickly. And then those parents passed on those immediate characteristics that they acquired right to their offspring. And let's look at his example that he used. So to support his theory, Limerick used the model of a giraffe's neck. You can see it, this image here. Okay, we all know a characteristic of a giraffe. They have a very, very long, long neck. Now, why do you think that a giraffe has a very long, long neck? He believed that the giraffe stretched its neck over long periods of time in order to reach the food on the trees, which led to the neck getting longer. So think about a tree, think about a giraffe, walking over to that tree, reaching up, looking for some leaves to eat. Of course, we all know with competition, the other organisms, they're going to, hi, welcome, we're just sitting, we're talking about evolution here right now. Thanks for joining. So talking about these giraffes, as they're looking up into the trees, they're competing with these other giraffes to eat the food. Okay, so it's competition going on here. So we know that the giraffes that are going to be shorter aren't going to be able to eat the leaves. The giraffes that are longer, taller, are going to be able to get more of those leaves. So what Limerick's proposing is that, the giraffes would come over there and they would look up into those trees and they would stretch their necks up. And by stretching their necks, they were actually making their neck longer, which stayed. And so he's saying over time, this particular giraffe neck would grow and grow and grow. And then when that giraffe would produce offspring, the necks of their offspring would be long as well. Thanks for joining. We're talking about evolution here. We'll have a moment here for some question and answer once I get past this little part here. So join on in us. So the longer neck was then passed down to the offspring. So in other words, Limerick believed that the hard work of a living organism would affect its offspring. So the giraffe that stretched its neck longer and longer and longer, that they would then produce the tallest or longest neck giraffe babies. Okay. This idea was certainly popular during Limerick's time, but it was later disproved by scientific research. Okay, for you guys that are just joining, we're talking here about evolution, just a little thing. Evolution means to evolve. So we're looking at how organisms change over long, long, long periods of time. Okay. So let's look at another one. So that was Limerick. Now we have Wallace. Wallace, he was born in 1823, so a few decades later after Limerick. He did extensive field work in the Amazon River basin. So what he noticed is that many of the plants and animals had special features, characteristics that helped them survive in the conditions specific to the Amazon, where he was doing these observations. This led Wallace to develop a theory about how species of plants and animals, that they gradually change through a process known as evolution or natural selection. Wallace's theory was developed at about the same time of another scientist, Charles Darwin. So about the same time as these two, Wallace and Darwin, they both kind of took Limerick's idea and changed it based on their observations and came up with this idea of evolution, this gradual change over time. And let's look at that. You've probably heard of Darwin. So Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in England. He studied medicine at the university. He later enrolled in Cambridge. What can we tell you? You've probably heard about his very famous voyage on the HMS Beagle. He took lots and lots and lots of observations on this voyage. He wrote about the different plants and the different organisms that he saw. He also would take along specimens. He would collect fossils that he found. And he wrote a book about this, if you've heard of The Origin of the Species, where he collected all of his data and put that in there. Probably his most famous travels were to the Galapagos Islands. It was there that Darwin found lots of variations in the different plants and animals that he saw, and this helped him kind of come up with the ideas for his theory. What he noticed that Galapagos is a very kind of protected place, and what he found is that the organisms there were very different than ones that he saw. So Origin of the Species, the book that he produced after all of these travels, and this introduced the idea of what we call natural selection. It's a process by which organisms change over time as those best suited to their environment survive to pass their traits on to the next generation. So going back to those giraffes, let me show you that picture again. So when we're talking about Darwin's theory here of natural selection, he's saying that the giraffes that have these naturally longer necks, that they're more naturally selected for that environment to survive. So he's saying that we have characteristics, and some of our characteristics give us an edge. We're better suited to our environment. So the giraffe that has that longer neck, that is taller, is going to be able to eat that, find that food, whereas the other organisms, we know when competition comes in, they might not be able to. And so the ones that have that longer neck that can reach higher up into the trees to get the food that others can't, they're then going to survive and pass on these traits to be taller. A popular study that Darwin produced is on the finches of the Galapagos Islands, and what he found is that there was many, many different types of species of these little finches. And he looked at, what he was looking at was their beaks. And what he observed is that they have, different shapes and different sizes. You can see this one, very long and pointed, short and fat. And what he watched and observed was he looked at what they ate. And so as we think about all of these different finches living in this small area, they're all competing over food. And if they all ate the same thing, only so many of them are going to be able to survive. So what he proposed is that these finches naturally evolved over time so that they could eat other things. There was finches that, ate the bark. There was finches that ate berries, and there was finches that ate seeds. And their beaks changed or evolved over time to better suit their surroundings so that they could eat those foods and continue to survive. So after we got these theories coming out, scientists then looked more into this, and they came up with this idea of phylogeny. And that's that organisms have a lot of common. And because of all these similarities between the organisms, it's believed that organisms have common ancestors, meaning organisms may have branched from each other and developed into new species through evolution. Darwin saw similarities between modern species and species that are no longer living, and he developed this theory based on fossil evidence and field observations, which we're going to look in. So again, when we're talking about in science, we can't just throw these ideas out. We have to have something that backs it up, and we use evidence as a way to do that. Evidence suggests that all organisms are somewhat genetically related. So we're talking about, our DNA. Not that we're saying it's the same, that we're saying it's related. I'll show you some examples here in just a moment. These genetic relationships could be represented in what we call an evolutionary tree. And this represents the phylogeny of organisms, or what we say, the history of an organism's lineage as it changes over time. So it's kind of like a family tree, except for it's showing changes of a species of an organism. Phylogeny shows the different species arrived from previous generations, and that all organisms from the smallest bacteria to the largest bacteria to plants and organisms are linked in together. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so this picture shows us what phylogeny looks like and how phylogeny branches into different species like the branches of a tree. Thanks for joining. We're talking about evolution here. I'm just going into phylogeny, looking at how organisms can kind of be like a tree, showing how we can branch off. It seems kind of odd to think that humans and, say, beetles, like in this picture, that we could have some common ancestry. But the idea is just saying that we divided away from each other at some point in time. So as we think about, the beginning of Earth, not all the organisms that we have here today were there. Again, life was very, very different on Earth. The climate was different. The composition of the atmosphere was different. And so certain things could survive. As we started out, the most simplest forms, bacteria, were the first organisms here on Earth. And over time, organisms can change and evolve and branch away into what we have today. Okay, so this looks at activity 4.3.1. This is on evolution and phylogeny. Again, for you guys that are just joining in here, you're welcome to use your microphone. If you have a question or some feedback here, you can also use your chat function if you have a question. And I'm going to go over this little part, and then I will open up questions to you guys too in just a moment. Okay, so let's look at these questions just to go over what we talked about. So evidence suggests that all organisms are genetically related. So we talked about that as we talk about, well, these three scientists come up with these theories and ideas. They have to have something that provides the evidence, because were we there? And that's the big thing is, we're talking about organisms that might not be living anymore. Okay, and so we have to look for evidence. And so we can look at, the fossils. We can look at DNA, and we can say that evidence suggests that all organisms are genetically related, and that is true. Number 2 here, the slow change in organisms that occur over many generations by the passing down of inheritable traits is called, they give us a couple choices here: evolution, genetics, natural selection, and phylogeny. So again, think of these words. Which one means to change over time? That's right, evolution. So to evolve means to change. So evolution is the slow change in organisms that occurs over many generations by the passing down of these inheritable traits is evolution. Number 3, Limerick developed the theory of natural selection. That is false. He did come up with a theory, but his theory was the theory of acquired characteristics. Again, he thought that organisms in their lifetime could do lots and lots of work and pass those traits on. The theory of natural selection came from Charles Darwin. So that statement is false. Darwin's famous voyage took him to England, New Zealand, the Galapagos, or France. That is right, the Galapagos Islands. Number 5, in 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species. This book introduced a process by which organisms change over time, as those best suited to their environment survive to pass their traits to the next generation. And this is also known as evolution, natural selection, genetics, phylogeny. So the organisms best suited to their environment survive to pass on their trait to the next. That is natural selection. So we're saying that these organisms that have the best characteristics for that environment that they're in are going to be naturally selected to survive. They're going to live and then pass on their traits to the next generation. The history of an organism's lineage as it changes over time is called genealogy, a tree, ancestry, or phylogeny. So again, we're not looking at just one particular one, we're looking at a whole species here of organisms, how they change over time. That is phylogeny. That goes back to that kind of tree picture image showing the different branches. Okay, so I briefly went over the start here of bio semester 2, looking at unit 4, looking at evolution. Does anybody have any questions over what I just discussed? We can start with that point. Okay. Again, you can unmute yourself. You can just talk out loud. You can use your chat button as well. Then if you have questions about another topic, or if you have a question about a particular assignment, we have some time. I'm here to help you if you want to get some quick answers here.
I'm trying to pull it up.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I'm trying to pull it up.
Pull
I'm behind. I've been diagnosed. I just got diagnosed with MS, so I've been behind. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you're feeling okay.
Yeah, I'm feeling better today.
Good.
I'm able to work at least.
Good.
So. Well, I guess I should probably talk to my teacher for this, but I thought I did these two activities in the first part, but I may not have. I think I might, because I already took this class once, but I didn't finish it. So she had me redo it again.
Okay.
So I don't know if I did do it or not. But sometimes I have troubles doing it on my tablet, and it doesn't go through.
Okay, so like when you're submitting
DNA and genes, it's activity 1.2.2 and 1.2.3, I think it is. Those two, I swear I did them, but I could not have. But I have a question anyways. Let me pull it up.
Yeah. With some of these assignments, sometimes they do have the double submit. So you have to click the two buttons to make sure that it goes through, one that you're completing it and then one to submit it, which can definitely get pretty confusing.
Okay, now with that lesson, the 1.2.2 is the specialized genes. It says that you could choose whichever gene you want. And all I could find was on BRCA 1 was that it was breast cancer, but it was also other cancers.
Okay.
So what do I do about that? Because it's mainly breast cancer. Do I just put that down then?
In the question they are, I'm trying to pull it up. I keep going to the wrong course. So on the part of the question that they are asking you,
genes, the full gene's name and the protein this gene codes. So, but it doesn't have a gene name. BRCA. That is what it is.
Yes. Yep.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that's sorry. Now I get the question. Yeah, so just those letters are the actual name of it.
Okay.
So talk about some of these genes. They're we'll use letters and we'll use numbers to name them.
What's the 1 stand for?
On that particular one, I don't know. If you can do a search and just type in that number, and it'll give you more information about that. Yeah. But yeah, that would be the name of it. So we're asking, what is the name of the gene? That's where you would put that.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I didn't know. I was like, I can't find the answer.
Oh, don't read it too much. That's it. That was it. Yeah, and so then you just explain what does it do, and then what happens if it's not functioning correctly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then the next.
Yeah, go ahead. You have another question?
Next question I had. Yeah, it was the next activity. I think it was.
Okay.
Hold on.
I know when we want it to pull up, it doesn't want to pull it for us, huh?
Yeah. Well, I just got my computer fixed too. My husband just got to go back to factory reset and try to get it to. So.
So are you looking at 1 DNA and RNA?
yes, the summary of difference between DNA and RNA.
Yeah. So it's compare and contrast the two.
Okay.
So what do they have in common?
Like, there's a huge similarities and a huge difference. Should I just put it like?
I always say if
all of them are just.
No. I always say if there isn't an exact number given, I would give 3. 3 is always a good number. So what do they have in common? And then what is different about them? And it says you can make a list or you can write it out as a sentence. So, you know, if you want to make a list and put, you know, contrast, you know, what do they have that's same? Or you could just say same, and then you could make a list for differences. So you could be looking at, you know, DNA being a double strand, whereas RNA is just 1 strand.
Okay. All right. And then about the carbon ring attached to the second is a carbon in the ring, which has this whole sentence. I'm confused on the whole thing. The second part of the question. It says the only difference between ribose and I can't even say that word. Is that
DNA and RNA? So you're looking at the different sugar, the bases.
Yes. Yeah. It says which has negative H attached to the second carbon in the ring.
Okay. So, you know, when we're getting into things like biochemistry, so what you're starting to talk about when you start talking about these numbers and stuff, yep, you're going in, definitely getting into that kind of chemistry part of it. And, you know, if that's interesting to you, totally go there. But I will tell you that here, all we're looking at is just the basics of it. So how it looks. So when talking about that, we're looking for DNA and RNA. We're looking at just what the sugar is that it makes up. So like DNA is deoxyribose.
I took AP chemistry when I was in high school.
Oh gosh.
and so I was going into the chemistry instead of the biology.
You're going via what kind of the learning goal here is for just this is. We're just looking at the basics of the structure and the makeup of DNA and RNA and how they're similar and different. So for that particular part, you would just look at, you know, what type of sugar each one of us made from. And so DNA is made from deoxyribose, whereas RNA is ribose. And so that's what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yeah. And then another big one is the 4 bases that make them up. Okay. And again, I'm going back to the comment you had about.
I still want to go into the chemistry part.
Don't go there. No, we're gonna stick here with biology. If you're having problems with your assignments, if you're saying, you know what, I really think I submitted, I remember doing this one, I finished it, you know, I always suggest to students is you can always take a screenshot of that completion page and, you know, and then you can send it to your teacher and then we can, you know, put it in for you. And then if it continues to happen, then definitely we need to look in and see if there's more, you know.
Yeah, they told me last time one of the classes that I did like half the class and it showed up next time I went in all zeros.
Yeah. And so, we had a couple bugs and so we do love to hear that feedback, you know, if something is not working for you. You know, we tried to fix it by kind of putting in that reminder again about the submit and the finish buttons. And then also, you know, if you
notice. The other day it wouldn't let me on math.
Yeah, track yourself.
It wouldn't let me in my math at all.
Oh, that's hard. Track yourself with you know, you can take screenshots just to kind of say, hey, like, look at it showed. Because that's the first thing that they always ask is, you know, do you have a screenshot of it to show that you did finish it?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the questions. That's what we're here for. Any other questions? I'm going to talk a little bit about evidence and then I'll go back and open up to some more questions. Okay, and then let's talk about evidence, which I'm sure we've all heard this before, right? Maybe you have siblings, you remember being a kid, I'm thinking about my kids, and it's like, brother hit me, and it's like, okay, no, I didn't. One says one thing, one says the other, and I'm like, well, I wasn't there, so how do I know? So when you think about evidence, what does evidence mean, and why is it important? You can think about it in daily life, you can think about it in terms of science. Okay, so evidence, it helps us kind of prove that something happened or is happening. We know that there are sometimes, maybe we're not there. Maybe we're talking about Earth, and we're talking about billions of years ago when nobody was here. We can't always be there to see it with our own eyes, and so we need evidence to prove that this is happening. Okay? So can you think of different, oh, we won't go there. Let me go through the definition here first. I always like to read the definitions, when you like search online or you use a dictionary and you pull up these definitions, and you're like, here it is. The definition of evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. And you're like, oh my gosh, you got to like really think about that statement and break it up and be like, okay, what does that really mean? And then I like to put it in my own words here. Evidence helps us prove that something is correct or not correct. Or we say, somebody has a valid point or an untrue point, This is important because in some instances we weren't there, we can't know the exact details or see it with our own eyes, as we talk about in earth science, we talk about the different layers of the earth and what's happening inside, the center of our earth, but have we ever been there? No. So again, we can't see some of these things with our own eyes, so we need evidence, or we use other tools to provide us with evidence to help us prove that this belief or idea is true or valid. So where do you guys use evidence at? I gave some other ideas here. Where do we use evidence?
A courtroom.
Courtroom. So yeah, any type of, crime investigations, courtroom, we have evidence. It could be in the form of,
Finding
DNA.
out which puppy peed in the house and which one didn't.
Yeah. Other, people can be evidence, somebody that was there in the situation. Yep. Okay. And then of course I gave ideas here of science and where we use evidence. So anytime we do some type of investigation, we're always collecting data, which is our evidence to help us support our hypothesis and answer that question about what we were looking at, investigating. So again, theories in science, we've talked a lot about we've got the Big Bang Theory, we've got the theory of plate tectonics, evolution, theory of continental drift. So all of these are, ideas. And what's with these is that, either we haven't been around long enough to see, the millions and millions and millions of years of change of this happening. And so we have to use evidence to help support this idea and make it valid. So as we think about, the theory of continental drift, that at one point in time, all the continents were one mass of land called, Pangea, one continent. And that over time they slowly drifted apart. The scientists had to collect and find data that would help prove this to us, because again, it happened over very, very, very long periods of time. And they used the evidence, the fossil evidence, they used looking at organisms all in various continents and how they were very similar. And then they looked at, the whole idea of looking at Earth and the placement of the continents and how they all fit together as that into that puzzle. We looked at the Big Bang Theory and using this idea of redshift and that, it's expanding away. With plate tectonics, the same thing, looking at inside of the Earth. We have to use, tools and technology to see how these things are happening, or as we think about, how new land is being formed, why we have earthquakes and volcanoes. And then of course with evolution, and that's what I want to talk about today in this last little segment here. So when we talk about evidence for evolution, because again, we're talking about generations over generations of organisms, of a species of organisms, and then on top of that, we're talking about, you know, all of these types of organisms. And we know that some organisms are no longer living, that they are extinct. And so we can't go and ask them because they're not living, and, you know, some organisms can't talk. So we look for evidence. So let's look at some pieces of evidence that help us show evolution is occurring. So the first thing we look at is we look at genetic evidence. And scientists compare DNA. So when we think of genetic, we're looking at the DNA of an organism. And so scientists compare DNA from living organisms to identify similarities among species. Now, nobody's going to have the exact same DNA, but we're going to see similarities, okay? So by examining ancient DNA, and this comes from fossils, so what's pretty cool to think about is that even though we might have organisms that are no longer living, we can find the remains from their body, which is a fossil. And so parts of their body can become fossilized. And in those fossils, scientists can extract out the DNA. If you get a good sample and it has what they need, you can actually still extract out the DNA from an organism that is no longer living. And this provides examples on how some species can evolve from, you know, their extinct ancestors. So by looking at DNA, scientists can also determine how closely related organisms are. This helps us kind of see this common ancestry. So the diagram below shows an example of primate DNA comparison. These percentages represent how similar our DNA is to a species. So you can kind of look at a human, and then you can kind of look at the similarities that we have. Now you might think that these numbers are super, super, super high, but again, it's these tiny, tiny little change, you know, the little percents there are what make those big differences. So compared to other organisms, yes, we do contain a lot of the similarities, and that's what goes along for this piece for evidence. It's saying that, yeah, look how closely our DNA is, kind of look at how it's changed over time. And so it's suggesting that branch piece, so that again, we all kind of arose from a similar ancestor, and that then over time we branched in to our own species. So one piece is fossil evidence. Another one is we look at is structural. And so we have these structures called homologous structures. And what that means is that the structures are similar in kind of origin and the structure. It provides evidence for this evolution. So although they have different functions, hello, thanks for joining. We're looking at some evidence here for evolution. So although they have a different type of functions, so we're looking here. If you look at these, we're looking at kind of what we would say is an arm. So we have an arm of a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. Most people would say like a flipper or a fin, and then a wing. And you could call that a leg. But again, they're all very similar in where they came and the structure that they have. What they mean by that structure is if you look at these bones, they're all, you know, they have the same name. These are the types of bones in a human arm, what we would call, but they're also similar in a cat, and a whale fin, and a bat. So it's showing those similarities. So this is some structural evidence that we have. They were all having these same types of bones. So you can see maybe the colors are a little bit easier to kind of see. We have structures called vestigial structures, and these are structures that they don't seem to have a function. Can you guys think of any that humans have? Any structures in our bodies that don't seem to have a function, but we have them? Sometimes they make us not feel so good. Okay, you can read through that. Anybody have their appendix or had their appendix taken out? That is an example of a vestigial structure. So in humans, we have the appendix, and it appears to be a small version of the sacrum, which is an important part in the digestive system of some mammals. And but we think about with us, what does the appendix do? It doesn't do anything for us right now. So we call that a vestigial structure. It's believed that maybe at some point in time, you know, it helped us digest certain foods that we ate when we lived, you know, more of that hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But at this point in time, there's no function for it. And so vestigial structures, they're believed that they were once functioning in a past ancestor or common ancestor that we would have. Okay, a little just misconception here because I'm using this word ancestor, and I know when we think about ancestor, we think about, you know, our family. And we're talking about a little step different here. When we're talking about ancestors in the terms of evolution, we're talking about species that are similar to us. So earlier species of humans would be an example of an ancestor. We're not talking about, you know, 3 generations from your mother. Not that type of ancestor. Okay, another one for structural here is what we call the study of embryos. Okay, so embryos, similarities in the embryos show that there's some evidence here of evolution because of the structure that they have. The embryo is the earliest growth stage of an organism. Okay, so you're thinking about an unborn baby. So if you look at these, they all kind of look the same, don't they? These are all different organisms. So actually, if you try and cover that up right there and just look at them, you're like, interesting. Yeah, they all look similar. But again, we have a fish, a reptile, a bird, and a human. So these are embryos of 4 very, very different types of organisms. But they all are very similar. Looking at, you know, the gill slits, the tails, the gill slits for breathing, you know, tail for moving. So it's, again, these 3 are what we use as structural evidence. Pretty crazy. Another piece is fossils. So fossils are the remains of organisms that have once lived. And fossils can provide evidence for evolution by showing us how an organism has evolved over time. A classic example is looking at a horse. These are different species of horses. So it would say common ancestors to each other. The fossil record here shows how the organism has changed over time. So look at this image. It's believed that the horse grew larger, taller, and lost the toes to gain hooves due to the change in the environment and the conditions it lived in. So here we've got the earliest form of a horse. And then again, this is evolving over time. And we are still talking about very, very long time ago. And so again, scientists have collected these fossils off of them. And you're thinking, well, how does a scientist know how old these things are? You know, you find a bone, how are we supposed to figure out the age of it? And there is a way for scientists to use tools to actually date and actually get an exact year. And one of the ways they do it is they look at the amount of carbon that is left in that fossil, because carbon kind of decays or it breaks down at a certain rate. Scientists can mathematically find out how old that is. Pretty crazy to think. Okay, so earliest, so here we're looking at this earliest species here of a horse. And again, it actually had toes, okay? And then you can see kind of the evolution that they're showing here as it moves from, you know, having more single toes to 3, they're getting thicker, and then of course we move into that hoof. So scientists believe that over time, as the horse, you know, changed to, you know, the conditions that it lived in, maybe it lived in an area that was, you know, soft and grassy, to an area that maybe was rockier. As the conditions changed, the structure of their hoof changed so that they were better suited to survive in that environment. Crazy, huh? Okay. And when we talk about the fossil record, this is like this huge, huge book of evidence for humans. The fossil record here on Earth, it's so important to us in understanding our history, because again, we weren't here. You know, humans have only lived on our planet for a very, very short period of time. And before that time, we have no way of knowing it except for based off of the evidence that we can find from fossils. Fossil record provides us a glimpse of Earth's geologic history. Scientists use practices, like I talked about, relative dating and radiometric dating to determine the age of, you know, different layers of rock. Most fossils are found in what we call sedimentary rock. So there's 3 types of rock on Earth. We've got sedimentary rock, igneous rock, and metamorphic rock. So fossils are found in sedimentary rock. And sedimentary rock, as you break that word down, think of sediment. So it's made up of, you know, sand and dirt, little pieces of particles of rock that are being squished together and compacted. And what happens is, you know, over time, we form these layers of rock. And, you know, as new land forms on top, the older gets pushed down into these layers. So layers that we find on the bottom are older, and the top layers are going to be the newest layers. So within these layers, scientists can learn about, geological events, volcanic eruptions, weather patterns, and kind of create this whole timeline of, organisms in the history of Earth over millions and millions of years. So it's pretty cool to think about, like, in a layer of rock, we can actually find, evidence for volcano eruptions. We can find, particles of ash will be in there. So pretty awesome. You can think about, like, the Grand Canyon in Arizona. Think about the different layers that you see in that rock. Not only is it beautiful, but of course it serves its purpose to scientists. There's lots and lots of geologic activity that goes on there, so that as they can see those exposed layers, as the land was cut out by a river, it exposed all of these layers that gave scientists tons and tons of evidence for Huron work. Okay, so when we talk about relative dating, we're kind of giving a relative idea of the age based on the layer. So again, we've got older layers at the bottom, and the top layers are going to be younger. Radiometric is using that kind of carbon dating, see how much of the element is left. Okay, so the fossil record lets us look at organisms that were once living and then compare them to what current living organisms look like to see their similarities or how they evolved. Think about, an elephant and a woolly mammoth. No longer living, but again, we have, fossil evidence of it. And so we can compare the two to see, okay, they, were once, they had common ancestry, they had similarities, and then they'd show how that those organisms changed over time. Okay, so we call these, we talked about phylogeny, kind of looking at the different branches. This is a picture of what we call a cladogram, and it kind of shows the same type of thing over a bigger stretched period of time, and it breaks the organisms down here into different types of categories. So we're looking at very simple life. This is actually the animal kingdom, looking at the different kingdoms of animals, and it looks at their similarities and differences over time. Okay. So again, the fossil record also provides evidence for, evolution by geographic distribution. We might find organisms that are similar. So we're looking here at, anteaters and armadillos. They're kind of very similar organisms that have similar characteristics, but they're, vary. And they also, as we think about where they live geographically, how does that influence those changes? Because we know through natural selection, which I'm going to talk about next week, it shows that, these organisms are going to adapt, and they're going to evolve to make to better suit their environment, so to speak. Okay. And then of course we can, you can go into human evolution, looking at our past ancestors and look at the different species of early humans that have lived. And, scientists use fossil evidence of bones, looking at our skeletons, and of course looking at our skulls to see how we have evolved over time. What pretty noticeably about human evolution is we look at the size of our skulls. From here, this is the earliest known to modern day, and as again you can see our skulls get bigger, meaning our brains have evolved. Our brains are getting bigger, so we're getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Also looking at the bone structure, they looked at how the organism could walk on, say, 4 feet, meaning it was quadrupedal, or walking upright by walking on 2. They looked at the structure of the vertebrae in the back, and they looked at the hip bones to see how slowly that organism began to become upright. So again, using evidence to help support this idea here on evolution. Okay, so in Unit 4 we talked about, it talks about evolution. We looked at, of course, before Unit 4, I looked at Unit 2 and Unit 3, going into genetics and inheritance and how these traits are passed on. And now we're looking at how species have evolved over time. And then in the next unit, we're going to go into natural selection and looking at survival of the fittest and how organisms best suited to their environments are going to survive. Okay, so as you go back into Unit 4 and you look at those questions on, phylogeny and evolution and the theories of evolution, you can come back to this lesson and kind of get the big major points of it. Okay. Okay, so I talked about evidence and I talked about evolution. I'll open up before we end here today if you have any questions either about that or if you have about something else.
Yeah, actually, how long does each of the lessons, like, how long is each week, like, in hours wise, or, should I spend on each lesson to catch up? Because isn't it due next week?
I think it's going to be based off of your enrollment time in your day. So you you want to try and complete your course as quickly as you can with the time that you have available. But everybody is saying, how much you need to do is going to vary by student. It's also going to vary by, unit. Some units are going to take less time. Other units are going to take a little bit longer, maybe with the activities that they have. So it's kind of hard. I always tell students, it's always great to make these habits. We're humans, we're creatures of habits. We always do kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And once it becomes a habit, it's just kind of natural. And so I know for me, it's like I have my, my morning routine of I always, get up in the morning and then it's like I get on my computer first thing and I check to see if there are questions, and that's just my habit. So I always suggest to students, it's always great to kind of set up, every day, every time, the same time, like you say, okay, 10 o'clock is my time. I'm going to open up my computer, open up my lessons, and I'm going to work from, 10 to 11, take a break, see where I'm at. And then I would go from, if you're behind, if you're behind on your pace, you got to think about, okay, how many days do I have to finish it? And then you could kind of subtract that and be like, okay, if I've got to get through 4 units in, 2 days, I need to do 2 units in a day. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah. Because at the beginning when I first started, I think I was doing like 2 or 3 classes within a couple days because I had insomnia, so I didn't sleep.
Oh gosh,
so all I did was study. So but
we definitely
now I'm trying to get back up.
Yeah. Sometimes we go through that roller coaster, and it's always good to try and keep, steady pace on everything. But, majority, it's 30 days that, you enroll in a course, you have 30 days to complete it. So then kind of break it up from there.
All right, thank you.
Hey.
When's the next study session?
So on your dashboard, it will show you, when you log on and look onto your dashboard, you'll have a little box up at the top and it'll tell you when the next one is. I think the next science one, I know I'm always on Thursdays and I'm always at 1 o'clock for right now until we get feedback saying that a different time would be better, which we're open to. So for science, I will be back on in a week, next Thursday at 1 o'clock. But again, you can check the schedule on your dashboard and it'll show you when the upcoming ones are. I think I was just talking about this yesterday and we were looking at, there's usually 10 to 11 sessions in a week, different curriculum content areas as well. So
is it 1 o'clock where you're at right now then?
Do what?
Is that what you're saying? Is it 1 where you're, it starts at 1 your time?
I'm in Pacific, I'm in Washington State, so I'm Pacific Standard Time. So it is 1 o'clock or not 1 o'clock here, it's almost 2 o'clock now, but yes, start 1 o'clock for me. So depending on where you are, it'll change, but definitely check your dashboard. It'll show you when the next sessions will be coming up and then you'll get announcements as well. Okay. If you guys have questions.
I have a question.
Oh, yep.
So even if you miss like the study session, can you go back and do it? Because like I have 2 jobs. So can they still save it or will it just end and I will have to go to the next week one?
No, so we've got this figured out. So we have a whole collection where these are being recorded. And so after the recording, a link gets sent out and then you can go and you can view all of these. Let's see, there we have a YouTube channel. Let me see if I can Let me pull you guys down so I can find the link here, and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
And so all of these, each one of them is put up here on this channel. Come on, chat.
Now, are we able to see past ones before this week?
I'm sorry, what?
Are we able to see ones before this week then?
Oh, yes. Yep. There is a whole ton of them. We've started these in June. Sorry, I cannot find my chat box. There it is. Wait, there it is. It's hiding down at the corner. Oh, okay. Yep, so all of them that we have done since, did it go through? Did you guys get a chat from me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm all blocked out here. My poor chat box. Oh. Yep, so they've all been recorded, and that's where we put them. And so every week we add to them. And so you can always, I just bookmark that, and then all the new ones are added in there. And so you can look at, you know, the different curriculum areas. As you can see, there's stuff from PE and health, and there's some for English and math. And of course, all the science ones are in there as well. And you can filter it by science if you go to, I think it's playlist, and then it'll allow you to choose science. So yes, totally, we understand that you know, the timing on these not going to work for everybody. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why they are recorded, so that you can go back. Or maybe you're not to this point in time in where you're at in your course, you know, so you can come back to it. Good question. Yeah, great. Also, if you guys have ideas for a live session, if you're, you know, something coming up in science and you think, like, hey, next week will you do a, you know, a little something on this? I would love that feedback. You know, you can send it to me if I'm your teacher. You can send a chat, an email, or you can send it to, you know, your science teacher as well, and they can pass on the information to me.
And then I have another question. So my local advocate said that this is extra credit. So like, since we talked about, oh yeah, if we miss it, so like, even if we go back and watch it, like if we miss the live session, so if we go back and watch it, will we still get the extra credit, or is this even like an extra credit like activity?
You know, I don't know if I can't answer that one, because I'm not a local advocate. I'm one of the teachers, but your local advocate may have something set up, and I'm going to ask that question here to other people and see what that is, because I know they were looking to kind of give some type of an incentive program, and I didn't know how that worked out well. First thing, I would ask your local advocate. I would assume if you were, you know, viewed the live session or part of the live session, that was part that would be counted. But I can't answer that question specifically because I am not your local advocate, and so I didn't make that up.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry. Just send them a quick chat and be like, hey, you know, and if they need some type of documentation, we can figure that out.
All right.
Sorry.
All right.
Just ask your local advocate. You'll get an answer.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask my supervisor. We'll find out. I'll ask that question too, because yeah, that would be helpful to know.
Okay.
Great. Okay, you guys. During,
I think you should offer study groups where
study groups.
You know, if you guys are busy or something.
Create little communities. No, good idea.
Yeah.
Again, during this week, as you move on, if you have questions, please reach out to your teachers. You know, we don't want you guys to get frustrated, unmotivated, any of that. You know, reach out. We're here to help you guys. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. I hope you got a little bit more information. You got some help. Have a great week, you guys, and good luck this week in your studies.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
You too.